Sometimes we tend to write off what people say about us. It's not important. I'm doing what's right. I'm doing the right thing. Let people say what they want to say, and we carry on our happy way. Sometimes it involves being truthful. A person says, I'm just saying it as it is. I'm being truthful. I'm being honest. People don't like it, not my problem. And what we'll see today is that sometimes what people say about us is a terribly important mirror to look at and to at least trigger our questioning of self-awareness. Is it possible that what they're saying is actually right? Is it possible that there's some truth in what they're saying? Sometimes it's a gift. The feedback we give, if we have a friend who gives us honest feedback, or we have a boss who gives us feedback. Feedback is an incredible gift, as painful as it is sometimes. And public opinion is part of that feedback process. And we'll see this in our Gemara through an amazing word in the Rambam. Reputation is a tool of self-awareness. Karula Beit in Shariah in Avodah Zarah Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph. Mistamich va'azu Rabbi Yehuda Nesio akatve de Rabbi Simloi Shame. Rabbi Yehuda Nesio, that's Rebbe's grandson, was leaning on the shoulder of Rabbi Simloi, who was his shamus. Rabbi Simloi was serving him and helping him, and he was leaning on the shoulder of Rabbi Simloi. Just for context, remember that we've had Rabbi Simloi just a daf ago on Daf Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. Of course, we've had Rabbi Simloi all over Shas. We often have Dorash Rabbi Simloi. Rabbi Simloi was a very innovative thinker, and he was a darshan. He was doresh. He was created beautiful ideas through his power of drosha. But on Daf Lamed Vav, we have a situation where Rav says to Shmuel, I'll quote it down in the footnote, Simloi Ludor Kamri, so you're bringing me a raya, you're bringing me a proof from Rabbi Simloi. He comes from Lod. He is part of that Lod school. Shani Luda de Mizalzulu. The people in Lod don't take the gezeros of the Rabbanon very seriously. So don't bring me a raya from Rabbi Simloi. Just bear that in mind. It's only a daf ago. Omele Simloi lo ayita emesh beves hamedrash kishi yitanu et hashemen. Simloi calls him. You the guy who likes heterim. You like to find kulas. You like to find ways around the gzeros of the Rabbanon, and you weren't in the Beis HaMedrash last night. Where were you? Do you know what happened last night? I was matir shemen. Even though the Isur of Shemen, we've learned, was an old Isur that was introduced, olive oil that was produced by a non-Jewish people, a non-Jewish process, like wine, it was forbidden for all the reasons that we've been discussing in the Gemara. But last night I made a decision that we're canceling that gezerah, and from now on you can have any oil. An amazing thing. Imagine such a thing happened with wine, that you would have in the Beis HaMedrash, the Rabbonim would get together and say, you know what, from now on, you can go to any bar, have whatever wine you want. We've done away with the issue of Stam Yeinan. It doesn't apply anymore. It's a great event in halachic evolution. And you weren't there, Simlo. You who love these heterim, this was the heter of the century and you missed it. What went on with you? Amalo biyamenu tatiris apas. Simlo says, really? I hope the next thing is you'll allow pat, because we're not allowed to eat bread either that was baked by non-Jews. There's a difference if it was baked in a bakery, if it was baked privately, but there's an isur, the same set of isurim, with bread that is baked by non-Jews, all for the same reasons. I hope you'll do that with bread as well. I hope you'll undo bread. And the Mefarshim explain, because just as the reason that Rabbi Yehuda Nesio undid the Gezerah, because Einat Tzibur Yicholim La'amod Bo, this was a case, as we learned yesterday, where most of the community couldn't stand with that. They needed oil, and the Jews weren't producing all the oil. How are you going to stop people using olive oil because it was produced in Italy or it was produced in Spain? That's what people were using. So it is with bread as well. How do you stop people eating bread? They're traveling, they're in all sorts of places. You need to do the same with bread. So he's not, Rabbi Simloi, true to his character, is not all that impressed that he undid the gezerah on oil. He wants him to undo the gezerah on bread as well. Omar says that this is unbelievable. And the strangest thing is that nobody is shocked by this as I was. Says Rabbi Yehuda Nesio to Rav Simloi, Im kein karuli based in a sharia. I would. But you know what? They're going to call me a makel. People are going to say I take things too lightly. So I'm sorry, I can't do it. Titnan, and then it brings a case. They did that with Rabbi Yossi ben Yoezer. He permitted 3 different things. V'karule Yosef Sharia, and he got a name as Yosef the Matir, Yosef the Mekel. I don't want to be in that situation. Amelie says, no, Yosef ben Yoezer allowed 3 things. You've only allowed 1. You could still do a second one. They're not going to call you a Sharia. And he says, no, I've actually already done 2. And the Gemara explains which are the 2. This would be a 3rd one, and I can't do it. I've done oil, and I've done this other case with Shtoris. I can't do a 3rd one. They're going to call me a matir. And in fact, further on, the Gemara says that when they discuss this particular kula, and they say, who is this person who was matir? Omer Rav Yehuda Mishmur, Beis Dina de Shora Mashcha. It's the same Beis Din that allowed oil. So he's already getting a reputation for allowing the oil, and he says, if I'm going to allow the bread as well, that's going to be a bad situation. So what worries me in a piece of Gemara like this, and I imagine it's worrying all of you already. Really, you've got a Godel B'Torah, you've got the Godel Hador, Rabbi Yehuda Nisio, the Posek Hador. He's asked a shaila, which affects not only thousands of people in his generation, it's affected thousands and thousands of people for 2,000 years nearly. Imagine if he would have been matir bread. And he says, I would be matir. I don't think it's a right gezerah. I don't think that gezerah should have been made. And just as I've been matir oil, I should matir bread as well. But people will say, what people will say about me. Sorry, can't do it. And so we've been left for the next 1,500 years with the issue of Pasakum because Rabbi Yehuda Nisio didn't have the guts to stand up to what people will say. Really? Does that make any sense? So this Gemara is really very strange to me. But what's even stranger is how little this, and nobody else seems to be worried about it. Nobody else seems to be commenting about it. I was preparing the Matmonim yesterday with my son, with Moshe, and I said, this is the piece of Gemara I want to work on. And then we had to stop learning, and he went on doing some research for me, and he came back, he said, I think you should pick another piece of Gemara. There's nothing on this one. Nobody says anything. There's nothing to say. So I said, all the more reason. That's a good reason why we should be the ones to say if nobody else is saying. So look at the Rambam. The Rambam says a simple thing. After bringing this whole sugya in the 2nd parak of Hilchos Memrim, we learned part of the Rambam before. V'chol beit din shehitir shnei dvarim. If a beis din has already been matir 2 things that an earlier beis din prohibited, and a current beis din permits, al yemaher lahatir davar shlishi. Be careful about the 3rd one. Don't be in a rush to make a 3rd undoing of a gezerah. Where does that come from? Says the Kesef Mishnah from our Gemara. This is where it comes from. What's our problem with the Rambam? So this is all a very, very problematic learning. The Gemara is strange, and what's problematic with the Rambam is the Loshen al yamaher, don't rush into the 3rd one. So what are you supposed to do while you're not rushing? What are you doing? Are you lying on the beach? Are you saying Tehillim? What are you doing? It says the Rambam, pause. Pause and do what? It's a little bit around like you asked Grok. Now, what do you do when in between our conversations? What are you doing? So, like, what is the Rambam? What are you meant to be doing while you're waiting to make the 3rd heter? It doesn't say you can't make the 3rd one. It just says al yemaher lahatir davar shlishi. What does that mean? The Kesef Mishnah says it's from our Gemara, what people will say. The Ramban is brought by the Ran, Shafir Bizman Hazeh. Now also, if everybody got together and were matir pat, it would be okay, we could do that. Because ilav mishum de lo likru le beidina sharia v'sharia namiha. If it weren't for what people would say about him, he also would have been matir. Rabbi Yehuda Nisio. So we see clearly in the Rishonim that the only thing holding him back was what people would say. But what's interesting is the Rambam doesn't say that. The Rambam doesn't say, it's true, the Rambam often doesn't give reasons, but here the reason is the whole thing. The whole reason not to do a 3rd one. It's not as if it's a Gzeres HaKosuv. It's not as if the reason not to do a 3rd one is because people will say. And by people saying you're a makil, what's so serious? It's not just I'm worried about public opinion. It's if I'm being labeled as a makil, then it ruins my effectiveness in the future. Every time I'll say something, they'll say, he's a makel, you don't have to take it seriously. They did that with Moshe Feinstein. There were people who tried to trivialize him and to marginalize him. He's a makel, which of course he wasn't. That wasn't his approach. But that's how he was perceived to be because he solved problems. And what we see from Rabbi Yehuda in this year, Rabbi Yehuda is saying, my capacity to paskin for the door will be damaged if I'm labeled a mekil. So I can't do it. I'm stuck. I just can't do it. It will be too damaging to do. And the Rambam doesn't mention that as the reason. He just says, you don't do it. Be careful. Don't rush into the third heter. What does the Rambam really say? Look at the Tosfos Rid. The Tosfos Rid, we've spoken before about the Tosfos Rid. He was in Italy. We've spoken before about the Italian almost style of the Tosfos Rid and his school. He was one of, but one has to understand also that he was a Gadol Ador in the 12th century. He learned with the Balei Tosfos, and then he went back to Italy. And it's important to you found in the Maharam Rutenberg. The Maharam Rutenberg quotes in the footnote, quotes Rabbeinu Yeshaya Mitrani, which is the Tosfos Rid, and he says, and that's also written that way in the Bahag and the Goinim and so on, and therefore he says, Hilkach, therefore, since the Tosfos Rid says this, you've got to force this person to give a get. That was the shaila that the Maharam Rutenberg was talking about. And then look what he writes, Ki mi yarim rosho v'libo al ge'onei olam halalu. Who would have the audacity to question these great Goinim? Ba'amor HaGodol Rabbeinu Gershom, v'haGoinim Rabbeinu Rav Alfas, and the Rif, v'Rabbeinu Moshe Bar Maimon, and the Rambam. Are you going to question these people? You've got Rabbeinu Gershom, you've got the Rif, you've got the Rambam, v'Rabbeinu Yeshaya Mitrani, and the Tosfos Rid. That's where the Maharam Rutenberg places the Tosfos Rid. We've got to understand context when we learn the various sources in the Rishonim and the Achronim and the Gemara. What is the context? Who is the Tosfos Rid? So the Tosfos Rid writes, he brings the Gemara, and then he says, I would have been matir the bread. You're right, Simloi, Rabbi Simloi, you're right, I should give a heter for bread as well. But because this gezerah should never have been made. It's been made over the heads of the population who can't stand by it. He doesn't say, I can't do it because of what people will say. He says, I can't do it because I've already done it twice. Do you notice the difference? He's leaving out in the Gemara the essence of what Rabbi Yehuda Nisor actually said. He's leaving that out and he's just saying, I've already done it twice. So he and the Rambam both don't reference the reputational damage. He and the Rambam just reference the fact that I've already done it twice. So why is that so important? And what does the Rambam mean with this Alya Mahela Tir Davar Shlishi? In searching for people who are worried about this Gemara, I found Reb Zundel Kreuzer. Reb Zundel Kreuzer only died 10 years ago or so. He was a Talmud Chacham. Has anybody heard of Reb Zundel Kreuzer? I'd never heard of Reb Zundel Kreuzer. Reb Zundel Kreuzer was a cheder teacher. Literally, he used to teach in the cheder of Yeshivas Eitz Chaim in Yerushalayim. But he hung out with all the Gedolei Yisrael of the time, all the people who I knew as the Gedolei Yisrael when I was in Yeshiva, with the Steipler and with Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik and with Rabbi Chaim Greinem and with Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky. These were the people that he hung out with and learned from all of them. And he used to give a Daf Yomi shir in Nachlaot. He used to live in Nachlaot in Yerushalayim in a little shul called Mishkan Moshe. He used to give a Daf Yomi shir. Now, you need to understand what giving a Daf Yomi shir was then. There was no art scroll. There was no Mesivta. There was no Koren. There was no Steinsaltz. All you had was a Gemara like this. And to every day to teach to Talmidei Chachamim, is teaching in Yerushalayim, is not teaching in Florida, is teaching in Yerushalayim. Every day to go through a daf, you can imagine his mastery of Shas. A simple man that we don't know anything about. He never wanted a position. He just taught children, and he used to give his Daf Yomi shir. And these, I'm pretty sure, are the notes from his Daf Yomi shir, because he's got it on a lot of Masechtas. And he, in asking a different question, says something which set me thinking on a certain track. He says, in the end, they did call him, as the Gemara says, they did say, Beis Dina de Sharu Mashcha. It's clear Rabbi Yehuda Nesio doesn't want to be called the Mekil. He doesn't want to be called the Matir. And for that reason, he doesn't allow the third case. Why does the Gemara call him the person who was that was Matir Shemen? Why become known by the very heter and you don't want to be known as a Matir? Suggests Reb Zundel Kreuzer, there's a difference between being known as a Matir in a particular case to be knowing as a matter generically. That's the difference. To be known, here's the person who was matir oil. That's interesting. How was he matir oil? Why was he matir oil? That's a situation. Just to be known, here's a makil. That's an insult. That means you don't think, you just want to take the easy way, you want to find a way out in every issue. But when you actually mention where the kula was, then it's adirabah hu kinu shel gadlut kocho. That's a compliment. שסומך על דעתו להתיר דבר שהורגל לאיסור כמה מאות בשנים, עד שבאו מצא טעם להתיר. That's a compliment to say, this person, there was always an isur, and this person found a way. So to be known as somebody who found a way, who solved a problem caused by a particular halachic challenge, that's a compliment. But to be known as he's a makil. What was he makil? I don't know, he's makil on everything. That's an insult. So what is Rabbi Yehuda the CEO worried about? That I'll be known as the one who was matir shemen. That doesn't worry me. That I'll be known as the one who was matir in the case of shtoras that the Gemara goes into. That doesn't worry me. But if I do it 3 times, the risk is I'll be known just as a matir. Now, I've mentioned to you once before, my Rosh Yeshiva, Rebbe Eli Mishkovsky, used to explain, I think he got it from his Rebbe, Reb Shimon, that a chazokah, when something happens 3 times, it's called a chazokah. You assume there's a pattern. Because if something happens 3 times, he used to say, there's a common reason for all 3 occurrences. If something happens once or twice, there can be 2 different reasons. This happened because of that, and this happened for another reason altogether. It doesn't mean anything else is going to happen. But if something happens 3 times, you can begin to assume that there's a common cause of all 3. If you matter something once, why do you matter it? Because that's how you understand the sugya, and that's what you think is important. You matter something a 2nd time also. But if you matter a 3rd time, perhaps the reason that you're being matter is because you're a makil. You want to find the easy way out. And he didn't want people to be saying that about him. So why doesn't the Rambam say, you don't want people calling you a makil? The Rambam doesn't say that. He says, period. He stops there. And what do you do while you're not quick to allow a 3rd time? Question yourself. They're going to call me a makil. They're not going to say, he's the one who was makil with oil, and he's the one who was makil with shtarot, and he was the one who was makil with bread. They're just going to say he's a makil. And I don't want that. No, says the Rambam, that's not the issue. The issue is you've got to go inside and question yourself. Why are you being makil? Are you being makil because you're a makil? Because that's your approach? You just like the easy way out because you're lazy? Or are you a makil because you really believe that's the right thing? Al Yamaher, check yourself carefully. Go deep inside. Use public opinion as a mirror to hold up to yourself and to ask yourself, people are calling me a makil. Am I? Is that really what underpins my halachic reasoning because I'm a makil? Or am I really a posek? What am I? Question yourself. Al Yamaher, go deep into yourself before you do that. And the beautiful thing is, if we learn that way, Rabbi Yehuda the CEO wasn't willing to go ahead. According to the way we're learning the Rambam, as we understand it with the Tosfos Rid, and with this insight of Reb Zundel, we understand what Rabbi Yehuda the is saying by not going ahead. Not I'm worried about what people will say. I'm worried they might be right. If I do it a 3rd time, I've got to question where it's coming from in me, and I'm not sure enough that it's really coming because I'm worried about the people and I think the halacha was not proper. There might be something in me that likes to be the makil. It's popular, people like it, it makes life easy for people. Maybe I'm being motivated by an extraneous driver that isn't pure. And therefore I can't go ahead and I can't be matir. And that explains to me why nobody's been matir since. As the Ramban says that the Ran brings even today, if everybody got together, we could be matir pat. Why has nobody done it? Who's going to have the chutzpah? After Rabbi Yehuda Nisio, if Rabbi Yehuda Nisio just says, I've done it twice, I can't do it a 3rd time. Well, okay, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, you haven't done it twice yet, you can do it. You can do it. Get everybody together and let's do it. No, that's not the problem. The problem is Rabbi Yehuda Nisio is saying, I'm not sure of my motivation. And if my motivation isn't 100% pure, I can't do it because I've done it twice already. Is this a pattern in me? Is there something going on in me that I am a mekil, as people might say about me? May they be right? Who's going to say, oh, Rabbi Yehuda, so he was worried about his deep motivation. I'm sure that I'm a tzaddik. I'm okay. I'm ready to be able to make that decision on behalf of Klal Yisrael. We see the gadus, we see the greatness of our Amoiroim, our Tanoim, our Amoiroim, our Rishonim and Achronim, greatness of humanity. They're not just great minds and great tzaddikim, just great human beings with such a level of self-awareness and self-analysis and self-actualization. So careful that what they do is not only right, but is also pure. That there's not only zehirus, that they're not only careful, as the Mesilas Yesharim says, but they also have tahara and kedusha, and they have purity and sanctity in every aspect of everything they do.